everyone. This is Liz Easton, and I wanted to take a quick second to invite you to listen in to the PC Book Club. Wait, I need to start again. Hi, everyone. This is Liz Easton, and I wanted to take a quick second to invite you to listen to the PC Book Club, aka PCBC. Every so often, Ricardo Avila and I chat about the books that you should be reading right now. It's just like sitting on your own private book club discussion, only there's probably slightly more references to true crime and Charles Dickens. I did not write this.
We may have to re-record that anyway, because I think you just said it's just like sitting on your own private book club.
She did. That was great. Sitting on a book club. Sitting on a private book club. That's pretty racy. Sorry.
Should I try again? It's just like sitting in on your own private book club discussion, only there's probably slightly more references to true crime and Charles Dickens. So if you're looking for the class with an occasional dose of the sass, then check out the PC Book Club right here on the Popping Collars feed. Class and sass.
Love it.
I was praying to the Lord for some fun.
Hello, everyone. My name's Greg Knight, and I like watching, thinking about, and talking about books. Yes, that's right. Our running bit about me not being a reader is going to have to be retired because I've gotten into a reading groove over the last couple of years. And, of course, one of the great things about starting your own podcast is that there are some days when you actually get to talk to the author of those books. This is one of those days. This month, I got the chance to talk to Nico Lang, the author of American Teenager, How Trans Kids Are Surviving Hate and Finding Joy in a Turbulent Era. The book description goes like this. From an award-winning journalist comes a vivid and moving portrait of 8 trans and non-binary teenagers across the country, following their daily triumphs, struggles, and all that encompasses growing up trans in America today. What I'll tell you is that Nico has taken on a remarkable project at a time in American history that feels especially fraught for the young people in this book, and it's impossible not to empathize with the challenges they and their parents face in the current political climate. But it's hard not to get swept up in the hopes and dreams of young people with their whole lives ahead of them and the myriad possibilities of youth. You will like, love, be frustrated by, care, and root for these young people as you experience their lives. A couple of things about Nico. Nico is a longtime queer journalist and the creator of Queer News Daily. Their contributions to queer media have resulted in a GLAAD Media Award and the inaugural Visibility Award from the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. So what happens when you spend a year living with trans youth from all different regional, cultural, and economic backgrounds in the U.S.? Find out as I keep things under the stole with Nico Lang. But before we chat, here's a brief excerpt from the book.
In April 2021, Kimberly paced her lawn in her bathrobe, clutching a cold glass of white wine in her hand as she attempted to grasp her new reality. That she could soon be imprisoned for simply supporting her child, a spirited and stubborn 10-year-old transgender girl named Kai. A recently introduced bill sought to update the Texas Family Code to target families of transgender children by amending the definition of child abuse under the decades-old statute. Republican lawmakers in her state were fighting to update that law to include allowing a transgender minor to access a puberty suppression prescription drug or cross-sex hormone, or undergo surgery for the purpose of gender transitioning or gender reassignment, per the legislation's text. If the proposal were to be signed into law, Kimberly would have faced a potential first-degree felony should she be found guilty of abusing Kai, a charge punishable by a maximum sentence of up to 99 years in prison and a fine of $10,000.
So I always like to start these conversations the same way. And most of the time I'm talking to directors and actors and stuff. So I'm really sort of curious as to like, why would you go into a business where you're constantly under anxiety and pressure, like, 24/7 to make a living? But with you, I think I'm really curious, like, what was the moment in your life that happened to you that made you think, this is what I want to do? I want to be a journalist. I want to tell people stories.
I didn't actually really have that moment. I kind of fell into it in a way, in that, I went to film school to be a film critic and maybe a screenwriter. And in that, I realized that I really liked documentaries and I liked making them. So maybe I sort of like leaned toward that with a sense of like, maybe I would do something after graduation. I wasn't very organized, I think, at like 24, 25 years old, and my thoughts weren't very organized. I feel like my likes and interests were going in a million different places. But luckily, while I was in school, I created a queer website that did really well. And that led to an opportunity at the Huffington Post, and that led to an opportunity at NPR, which is my first like real world, like big person job. I did like blogging for WBZ in Chicago, which didn't like pay great, but in terms of like visibility and just like putting my name out there, it was like fabulous. And it was like one of those things that one thing kept leading to another. And then in 2016, I had just quit a job that made me really unhappy because I thought I would like maybe write a book or something. But instead, I got a sort of part-time gig that, again, paid like peanuts. It was like $35 an article, being the East Coast correspondent for The Advocate. And that was right when, Trump had just announced his intention to run for office, and we were seeing all this anti-trans legislation start to bubble up across the country. And I had a sense then that there were people that were going to need their stories told. And a lot of the things that I'd been doing and the things that I'd been a little more interested in historically just didn't seem that important anymore. What seemed most important was to focus on the impact of these politically motivated attacks all across the country. And, during that time, I went to North Carolina, which had just passed HB2, the nation's first bathroom bill. And I met people on the ground who were impacted. I had dinner with them. I met their families. I went to their houses. And it was a lovely experience to be part of their communities and their worlds for a moment. Like, it really opened my universe. And I felt like I wanted to commit to doing more of that. Like, I think I had some sort of a rumbling then that day, that day that I got to North Carolina was going to be the first day of the rest of my life and the first day of the rest of my career. And it's really just completely reshaped what I do, what I think about myself doing in the world, the kind of like impact I want to have, just because there were so many articles about HB2, but there were few that were interested at all in telling the voices of people who were actually affected by it. And that's really what my work does. It tells the stories of the people who are affected by these policies that we see in the news. And then, they're treated so bloodlessly that we don't think about them having like a real world effect on people's lives, and I want to show that they do. These things matter, and these people's voices matter, even when we, are so intent on erasing them.
So was that the kernel for the book then, the shifting sort of political tide in the country? And then I guess the question would be, why teenagers? What was it about this particular experience that you found that you wanted to write this book about?
Ooh, I'll do that question first because you're the first person who's asked that. The other one I've been asked all the time. So this one's new. I love a new question. Mm-hmm. So I had tried to interview younger kids for a book like this, but it just didn't work. And for folks who aren't familiar, I'm sure you'll get it in the intro. But I spent a year traveling the country to spend time with trans youth in 7 different states. We'll see if we can do this in order. South Dakota, Alabama, West Virginia, Texas, Illinois. What was after Illinois? Florida and California. Yep. And, my goal was to just sort of show them as they are, to sort of like follow them around and depict what they do every day. And that's sort of like classic fly on the wall documentary style, which makes sense because I went to documentary school. Right. And my goal in doing that was to sort of cut past these like this dehumanizing rhetoric about their lives to just show them being kids, being people in the world, having these like mundane and sometimes profound experiences that the rest of us do. Like we sometimes treat them like monsters and aliens, but they're just like humans who are humans like the rest of us. It's really not that complicated, but we make it very complicated. And I had tried to interview younger kids for the book because at first I didn't really know what it would be. Like I knew that a book needed to exist. And I knew that we needed kind of a moral intervention here because you hear like all of these like anti-trans talking points that they're spewing. And it's just so alien to my experience. It's so alien to like the stories of the families that I've known for so long that I just don't recognize any like reality or humanity in it. So to me, it's like the way you speak back to that is by letting these kids speak for themselves. But the problem is that when you work with little kids, they're cute and sweet and it's lovely to spend time with them, right? I mean, just the energy that children have, I'm like, put that in a cup and give it to me, but they can't narrativize their lives yet. They can't really reflect from that like outside perspective that you learn to do when you get just a little bit older. And I think you start to learn that like introspection and reflection when you're a teenager. Right. So teenagers can do that. They can sort of piece together things. They can think big picture. They can think about like things like themes. They were often like helping me write the book in a way because they had their own ideas about what their story was about and what they wanted it to be about. And then even more than that, I wanted it to be really clear that all of these kids were the driving force in their own lives. Like I really wanted to focus on their own agency here because there's so much in the way of like myths and stigma here and that these kids aren't really trans, that their parents are forcing them to be trans, which is absolutely ridiculous because like if you're a parent out there, you can't get your kid to do anything. You can't get them to do the dishes or like do their homework, let alone be trans. I used to babysit in college for this couple who were absolutely lovely. And I'm sure their kids turned out well, but at the time they were total monsters. They were toddlers, right? So the idea that I could force one of those toddlers to be trans or their parents could have forced them, like, no, I could barely like keep them still for 2 seconds. It's utterly absurd. But I think that you like really get like that sense of agency when you hang out with older kids, when you hear about the world like through their eyes, when they're telling you who they are, it makes it so much more difficult to refute. It's also the reason that I didn't just focus on the parents because like the parents are, a small part of the chapter, but I felt like, that sort of in a way that, how do you say, that creates like this vacuum that that Republicans get to fill with just like misinformation and bile and fear. And I sort of wanted to head that off at the pass by just letting these kids be the main characters. Like it's their story. They deserve to tell it because I think that when you hear it from them, like it becomes a lot harder to pretend that this isn't real and that this is happening. Like these are these kids' lives. These are these kids' experiences, and they'd be happy to talk about it if they were ever asked.
Yeah, I think that that's something that I really appreciated when I read the book is the diversity of these kids' experiences. How, you can go from, one teenager being sort of an activist, sort of very much identifying as trans, wanting to be sort of a model for that community. And then you can have another teenager who doesn't even identify really as trans, just identifies as themselves and as their sort of religious affiliation, right? I'm thinking of Clint and that chapter that ends so lovely where he's like, I hope this is the most boring chapter in your book. I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was great.
Yeah. As soon as he said that, I was like, that's the end of the chapter. Thank you, Glenn.
So I guess I have a 2-part question. One is one that I've already asked you, so I know how to answer it, which is how do you get connected to these teenagers? And then the follow-up question to that is you talked about bouncing around the country, laying out these different stories, I was kind of taken with the idea that each month was a new story and a new circumstance. Sometimes it was a family of privilege. Sometimes it was a family living in poverty. Sometimes it was a person of color. Sometimes it was, white transgender youth. It was like you were kind of, each experience was very different. And I wonder if you intentionally mapped it out that way to have a diversity of stories as you move through the book.
Yeah, I mean, having a lot of different kinds of stories to me was important for a lot of different reasons. I mean, the sort of obvious one is that trans people are a really diverse community. If you were to tell the same story over and over again, it wouldn't be like a very authentic representation of like a community that is so different from each other. The only thing that trans people have in common is that they are all trans, right? Other than that, it's like there's like things like geographic background, there's racial diversity, ethnic diversity, where you're born in the world. Like if you come from outside the United States, there's religion, there's economic class, and this book really goes into all that stuff, and kind of in a casual way. Like my goal was never to sort of like box check or like force a narrative in a way, because I was never pushing an agenda. I just focused on stories that I felt like were really interesting to me, and that families that I really liked and had a story to tell. And I felt like those things that I wanted in terms of getting a lot of different kinds of stories would just come out from there. I also cast a really wide net for this. Like I was talking to a lot of families to make sure that I just had a lot of different kinds of narratives to pull from, and that I wasn't accidentally tying, one hand behind my back. Like I wanted myself to be able to go to all of these different places. But I also just felt that if we're doing this sort of structure where we do, it's like essentially one mini documentary, and then I leave to go to another place and it's another mini documentary, and I do that 7 times, if the reader is reading these 7 short stories, it would get really boring if it were the same kind of family over and over again. Right. That these families had to be as diverse and as different from one another as possible to just keep the reader engaged. Because I didn't want a reader to like bail on this book, A, because I'm selfish and I want them to finish my book, but B, because then they're going to miss something. They're going to miss like one of these kids' really valuable chapters because like they feel like, oh, like I've already read everything I need to read and I'm just going to like bail out. I didn't want that to happen. Like I wanted people to finish this book cover to cover. Like my worst fear is like on Goodreads, which you're not really supposed to read as an author. You're supposed to like stay away. But I maybe look at it like up to 10 to 12 times a day.
You're doing good. You're doing good on your ratings. I saw. Yeah.
Yeah. Who can say how often I check it though, But I just don't want to see that like DNF, which means like did not finish. Like I want people, even if you hate this book, right? You're like, this is the worst book I've ever read. I want you to finish it because that's what these kids deserve. Yeah. These kids deserve to be heard. They deserve to be listened to. Like that's what they've been looking for. They've been looking for this moment where they're reminded that their voices matter, because it feels so often that they don't. They hear that from their state lawmakers all the time, that they'll go to the legislature, the state legislature, they testify along with their friends. They try to keep them from passing these awful bills. And then the lawmakers just do it anyway. They don't listen. They stare up at the ceiling. They're on their phones. They're on their computers. They're not even present. Or there was this one right-wing lobbyist in West Virginia who got up and said, like in front of everyone, that it doesn't matter how many kids testify against the bill. We're going to pass it anyway. Right. So it's like, kids internalize that. They know what's going on. They know that like their lives aren't valued by these people, but I want them to know that they're valued by someone.
Yeah. Yeah. And the flip side of that, of a lawmaker saying something like that, or even a lobbyist, saying that on behalf of lawmakers, is what? To discourage you from participating in the political activism, right? Because if they don't have to hear from anybody, then they can make up their own narratives.
Yeah. And, to answer the other part of your question too, because you asked how I found them. This is kind of a boring answer. I've been doing this for a long time, and the first 3 families in the book were families I already knew through my reporting and I'd met. And I'd interviewed them before, but not at like this kind of length. Like I knew that there was just a lot more there to like dig into, to where I just wouldn't be rehashing the same information. And then the other families I found, three of them I found through LGBTQ plus advocacy groups. One was Equality Texas in Texas. That connected me with Ruby's family. And I loved them right away. And I knew that was going to be a great fit. And then for the other, for Illinois and California, those families I found through AAPI groups. So that's Asian American Pacific Islander. And again, not to like check a box, but just because I feel like there's been such little representation, not no representation, but not nearly enough in like the queer space of AAPI stories. And there just needs to be more. I have this friend, Jen Richards, who always says that the answer to every problem of representation is more. So that's what I wanted. I just wanted to give people more. So that felt really important because I knew that if I had a hunger to see those kinds of stories, then other people did too. Like especially AAPI folks would have a hunger to see that in the book, and it felt nice to be able to give people that. And then the last story in Florida, that was just a fluke. Like I'd really wanted a family in Florida, and I'd been like asking friends. I think I even put something up on my Instagram, and then they'd sent me a DM being like, hey, we saw one of your posts and we would love to talk. And the mom she spoke so well over the phone. She was the kind of person who was like willing to share a lot without being prompted. And I knew that was going to be great for a book like this because you need someone who's going to like be able to really go to these emotionally deep places with you. So it was a great place to start.
Yeah, and I was really fascinated by that story and a couple of the other stories, like the West Virginia story, also the Charleston story. The benefit of this book is being able to present, like you said before, a diverse group of stories. And one of the things that I was thinking of is the economic justice of gender affirming care. Yeah. This is really expensive. Like to be able to afford hormone therapy, to be able to afford surgeries, if that's what people would like. I mean, this is really expensive. And so I was curious, like you have like, several of the stories that I was kind of expecting, which is like, parents who are just looking to figure out like, how do I help my kid live the life that they are supposed to live, right? And then if you run into a parent like the story of Jack and Augie and stuff, where it's like not only are they being given limited care, but like it's real. Like the economics of it is very real in their household. Like, how do you live your truth knowing that there's a big number attached to the care of this, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like necessarily a super thoughtful response to that, except that I was really grateful that the families were willing to share some of these like struggles with us because that we don't often hear from like lower income families in this conversation. Not because I sort of want to shame anybody from any economic background here, but I think families who are better positioned economically and have a little bit more privilege in terms of they're not going to lose their job, they like might be like a tenured professor or something like that, right? Or they're doing okay. Those kinds of families are generally the ones who are willing to talk because they know they can't lose anything from it, right? Can't be retaliated against. They're not going to be fired, or they have the means to just like find something else or move to a different state or, what have you. It's the families who have so much to lose or just have so little resources anyway that you just never hear from, right? You never hear from like families like Jack and Augie's because they're very rarely available. They're just trying to survive. They're just trying to like pay their bills and get through the day. So, what they gave all of us here, I think is so like wonderfully brave. And it's such like a vulnerable place that they went to let people see them this way because I think most families won't, and I don't want to judge anyone here, but we all want others to see us in the best light. There's this really great essay by Irving Goffman about the presentation of the self. That sort of the self takes place on what we call a front stage and a backstage. And the front stage is what the parts of you that you want everybody to see. This is, when your makeup's done, when your hair's up and, everything is just so, your house is like clean. And then the backstage is all the stuff that you don't let anybody see. And the amount in this book that I was able to go to the backstage with people and go to these kind of like messy, often dark places that I feel like they might not let that many other people into, like I felt really like grateful and honored because that's, that's a hard thing. I know I don't let a lot of people into my backstage. I don't want people to see that. So the fact that in this book we were able to get to go to this really real raw place with people, that it wasn't just like surface level, I'm just like so tremendously happy.
That's great. I'm glad you went there because one of my next questions was going to be like, was there a performative aspect to this a little bit? Knowing that you're following folks around, like, was there a sense that folks were trying to show you their best side, or were they showing you their real selves in this? And so it sounds like that's what it was.
I think it's different. If you just share an hour with somebody, right? It's really easy to like put on a face and put on a smile and be like, everything's great. Everything's great. I just talked to this mom who's fleeing the country with her kids. And I could, as a result of the Trump election, obviously. And she, during our conversation, was really trying to put on a good face, and I could really feel it. And that's not a judgment against her. She's going through a lot. And I think she's trying to keep herself happy. I think she's trying to keep herself motivated and tell herself that everything's going to be okay. But like, I could feel that amount of work through the phone. Like I could feel it in the call. And it was also almost painful for me. Like I would sort of have to like pause, as a reporter, I would have to pause and be like, but what if everything doesn't go your way? What if this all doesn't work out? And it was really awful to have to ask her that, but it's like that. Unfortunately, that's my job. Right. And with these families, because I was with them for so much longer, I think even if they had been trying to put on an act for me, like it would be very hard to keep up that level of performance. Right. It's like immersive theater that they would be performing for me.
Right.
And I think that they also kind of forgot that I was there or they forgot that I was like a reporter doing their job, which was to document every single thing that they do. I think I do a good job of not seeming too much like a reporter. And I think that's actually quite on purpose, that I want people to be able to confide in me and treat me a little bit like I'm a friend. Like, of course, there are still professional boundaries that need to be enforced here. I'm not people's friend. But if people have that sort of vibe that they can like trust me and that I'll listen and that I really care about them, they're willing to share things with me that they won't other reporters. And in this case, it meant that I think they would literally forget that I am a journalist and they would just treat me kind of like a member of the family. And when you're treated like a member of the family, you get to see how families really behave. So I think that people are always going to be a little bit on their best behavior. I'm probably not seeing like, them on their like absolute worst days, but I think that we really got something like authentic and real in this book. Like, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want the happy, glossy 101 thing. Everything's great. There's definitely like happy and joy, and you get these like moments that are really celebratory, but you get everything else too. You get the tough moments, the hard moments, the, big cry moments. It's everything. Because I wanted you to feel like you really got to know these people, and you can't know someone if you're only seeing their front stage.
Well, to that end, this idea that you're living with these people, participating in their family life together. One of the things that stood out to me, and this is probably as a result of having a podcast that's about religion and pop culture, is that just about every chapter at least featured a story about what it is that they're consuming pop culture wise, whether it's like what kinds of movies are they watching, what are they listening to, and it ranges from like country music to classical movies to Cronenberg horror. Like it's like all over the map, right? And I love the fact that you give voice to sort of what's being consumed, like, in the household and stuff. But I was also taken with how many faith stories there were along the way, and you participating in whatever worship structure, or how, in the case of, I think it was Wyatt, right? The first, where it's like they had to leave their Baptist church because they were ostracized by their community and stuff. The fact that like all of these sort of community makers, but also pop culture makers that we sort of attach to our lives, like you can see how they're living it and how they're using those things to make meaning out of who they are in the world, right?
Yeah, well, it's like if the argument that this book was about kids being normal kids, like when I was 16, 17, like I didn't have a car. My family was really poor. So it's like pop culture was my life. Like my mom worked in a video store. And again, we were poor as but I could get all the free movies I wanted all the time because for having a extremely low paying job, it was a cool low paying job. So it's like when I
Mhm.
was, hanging out with her like on the weekends, we would be like at the video store. And then when I was home, I was just watching all the movies from the video store. So that was my life. And I feel like so many of the kids that I knew in high school were really into the things that they were in, right? Like it's a time where what you like feels really important to you and it feels like a like key to your personality and who you are as a person in a way that I just don't feel is like as important for me personally anymore. Like I love the things that I love, but they don't feel so like fundamental to my core being. To where I remember the first guy that I ever dated. I read him part of a Mark Twain book over the phone and he fell asleep. Or no, he didn't fall asleep. He said he didn't. Another guy fell asleep. He fell asleep during Howl. That was a whole thing. But he said he didn't understand any of it. And I literally broke up with him
Oh no.
because I was like, if you can't understand Mark Twain, you can't understand me. And it's like, of course, at 36, I'm not that dramatic anymore.
Right.
I don't view the world that way. But at 15, 16, I absolutely did. And I just don't think you could really understand who these kids are as people without understanding the things that they like do with their time. Like,
Mhm.
what do they like? What are they interested in? What does this say about like their personality or the kind of person that they would like to become? Because I feel like so often the things that we like as kids, this sort of conspicuous consumption, is our projection of a future self. It's a projection of the person we would like to be in 10 years and 20 years. Like I was always like watching really adult stuff because I wanted to be like a sophisticated adult who had seen a Guy Madden film,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, of course, that's what I not only was watching, but that's what I was telling people all the time, like what I was watching. Like, oh, I watched Mulholland Drive this weekend, friends. Have you seen Mulholland Drive yet? It's pretty good. You know what I mean? I
Right.
also just wanted to show that these kids experience the world the way the rest of us do. Like
Yeah.
it sounds so like mundane, but it's like people need to be reminded they watch movies, they play video games, they have a favorite book, they listen to Taylor Swift the way that you do, right? Like
Mhm.
we treat them as if they are these totally like these like creatures who have this completely different life than the rest of us do, and we could never ever relate to them or have anything in common with them, and we could never see ourselves in them. But it's just not true. Like they like occupy the same spaces in the same world that we do. And I think that like when you hear about I don't know, a kid who's obsessed with Sufjan Stevens and just like doodle Sufjan Stevens and his like note lyrics in his notebooks all the time. Like it expresses that in a way that like I don't have to as a writer. Like I don't have to tell you all these kids are just like you. You can see that in the book. You can see this sort of like this not sameness, but this like empathy being modeled. And I hope it helps these like the readers who pick up this book. I hope it helps them empathize with these kids if that's something that they need. Like, because I do think that there's sort of like an empathy deficit that I really hope to like address with this book.
Yeah, I think that that's so important. And, I want to talk about sort of legislation and all of that, so how it impacts these kids' lives and their parents and stuff. But no, I think that that's totally right. I think that the way that the pop culture is used in the book, it actually it's almost like it works as a key to kind of unlock not only what it is that they're interested in, all of that stuff, how they're making identity, but it's almost like it's serving to sort of back up what it is that they're working through in the moment. So like when Buffy shows up, it's like all of that Buffy stuff that you bring with you from watching that show, you're like, oh, okay. Kylie's like working through this, and this, right? Or
Yeah.
when Augie talks about Cronenberg, right? You're like, oh, all of that body stuff. Okay, so Augie's probably thinking through like this, and this. And it becomes kind of like not a shorthand, but like just another way of understanding what's going on in the interior life.
Yeah. Yeah, for me there I don't know if I was thinking about this at the time, but I'm absolutely thinking about it now. And I'm like, subconsciously, this is why I was doing this. I always think about that. I think about the fact that in high school, whatever you're reading in English class happens to mirror like what you're going through at the time. Like when I read The Bell Jar, it was already a very emotional time for me as like, like a 15-year-old sophomore. And that
Yeah.
book emotionally decimated me. Like I was not ready or prepared. I mean, I feel like so much of what these kids are consuming, like kind of mirrors like the journey that they're on right now. And they're like their place in it. And it mirrors thematically the things that they're experiencing, even if they don't necessarily realize it. And I also looked at this book in a this might be a strange analogy, but I swear it has a point. I looked at parts of this book as being like the power of myth, which is this fabulous Joseph Campbell mini series, and also a book that's sort of exploring the impact of myth on like storytelling and our sort of conceptions of ourselves throughout history. And I think that like what we consume now, like our like pop culture and entertainment, often takes the place of mythological stories in the way that they like acted for the Greeks. Like for the Greeks, that was their pop culture then. Like that was their podcast, that was their like Netflix TV show, were these like fabulous stories about like Zeus and Hera and these like gods in Mount Olympus, and how they spent their time. And for these kids, I think that what they're watching and what they're listening has that same sort of like meaning to it, of like them projecting meaning onto the world, like through like what they're experiencing, right? It's them trying to make sense of their place in the universe in the same way that the Greeks were through their pop culture. So I just see like such a direct lens that we don't often like, in a way that we don't often get to really like talk about. And I feel like these kids are actually dealing with in a really profound way. And I also just wanted the book to be really varied. Like I wanted like every page to kind of surprise you about like what was going to come up. And I never wanted you to feel like you were going to be able to pin down this book. And you never can. If any person like calls that there is going to be a random interlude in which Jack and I discuss Kierkegaard on a balcony, like you should play the lottery or something, right? Because clearly you are very good at this. As a bad guesser, I would have never called that like in a billion guesses. So if you did, kudos to you, Mama.
Love it. No, I listen. What you're saying is 100% accurate. It's all about storytelling. It's like when we're invited into the lives through the stories of people, then we understand like more of the people that surround us in the world, right? Like, one of the things that I love, in addition to your book, is that we get more stories like, gosh, I saw the TV Glow, or, the People's Joker, or something like that, where it's like people are able to put their lives out there into the world and express themselves and, and say, like, this is who I am, this is what I love, all of that stuff. So.
But the thing is that it's funny that you brought up those two things, because they're both trans people expressing something about themselves through remixing pop culture. One of them is Batman and the other one is Buffy, right? Which is sort of this
interesting. Yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah, the same thing that this book is doing. It's like using pop culture to draw a parallel between like yourself and the world.
Mm-hmm. The future. Is it okay?
Sorry,
I don't want to take us down a dark road. I think the maddening part, and just talking about these people's, these kids' lives, and just seeing, oh my gosh, like how well you sort of walk through not only what they're going through, what their parents are going through, and contrast that with sort of the political rhetoric. It strikes me that what we're talking about is how can parents and children best make decisions about what is care for themselves and for their child that's in their care. Something that it seems like conservatives are all about, as long as you're opening up a Bible college, but can't seem to be about if you're talking about like, hormone therapy or gender affirming care. Like, I guess I'm confused by the level of hypocrisy at work, where it's like, oh, it's a parent's choice, except when it's something that we don't like. Right.
Well, I mean, they love My Body, My Choice when it comes to vaccines, but not with like abortion care, and not when it comes to gender affirming care. You know what I mean? Like then my body, my choice goes out the window. And you can say the difference is kids, right? That both of those things have to do with children, but that's not even necessarily true because they're trying to also restrict gender affirming care for adults. So like I don't know. Like I wish that I had a portal into conservatives' brains, and I wish that I understood it. And I probably should a little bit better because I've been doing this for so long. But I gotta say that I don't. Like I don't know like why this is so tough for people. Like I think a lot of this caught me off guard because sort of the origin story of this book is that in 2021 Kimberly Shapley, who's a mom in Texas, called me because the state had introduced a bill that would brand parents of trans kids as being child abusers if they allowed their kids to transition, right? So if she were allowed to, or if she allowed her child to access puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy, or really even just affirmed her being trans at all, let her use like the pronoun she wants to, the name she wants to, wear the clothing she wants to, she could be thrown in jail and branded as a child abuser for the rest of her life and put on the sex offender registry. And when Kimberly and I were talking over the phone, I realized how naive I'd been because I always felt like that when it came to trans kids, that there were some people who maybe had disagreements or like philosophically, religiously, whatever, or had questions or concerns or all this stuff. But at the end of the day, these are kids, and don't we like want the best for kids? So I always just thought at some level it was just bad information that I could replace with good information. Like I thought that was my role as a journalist, to just give them better information. But I don't think I realized until that day, talking to Kimberly on the phone, that so many people don't have good faith here. They have tremendously bad faith. They don't want what's best for these kids. They don't want what's best for their families. And I got to say, I still, even after writing this book to inject some good faith in the conversation, I still don't totally understand it. I'm still perplexed by like the hatred and the like fear that's out there. Like, is it just that people like fear that what they don't know? Is it something more? Is it about like the destabilization of gender? I don't really know, but it just really disturbs me, honestly. Like these are children. Like these are children who are being made into public enemy number one, who are being called like monsters and deviants and perverts. And I just don't get it.
Yeah, I got to think that there's some deep sort of like self-hatred that's rooted in all of it. But gosh, the hypocrisy of it. Like, I'm just thinking about the rhetoric around this idea of, gender assignment at birth and like that being related to sort of like how God creates you and stuff. And I'm just like, oh, okay, so if my kid needs glasses, I don't get them glasses because God created them that way, so I can't correct their vision. It's just like it's just so confusing to me, like the level of hypocrisy. But then again, I guess hypocrisy is inherently confusing. So
wow. Well, like, what if your kid has diabetes, right? Like,
right.
God create them to have diabetes so you can't give them insulin. Like, I just don't get the sort of pick and choosing here. And I don't want to be too criticizing, but I do think that that's sort of a thread of like modern evangelicalism, that they really love picking and choosing the Bible. Like they love reading it and deciding the things that are going to apply to them and the things that they're going to read into it and the things that they absolutely won't. Because all those people are eating shrimp, they're all like wearing clothing in more than one fabric. Like they don't care about that, but they sure do care about, God created the male and female. They love that one.
I want to go more optimistic. How do these kids see their future? Like what do they see in store for them? Did you ask them about like what they think their lives are going to be like moving forward?
I don't mean to squash your optimistic question because I have an optimistic question, but I think it's changed a lot since the election. Like
Okay.
I don't think anybody really knows what their future holds anymore because there's so much like wait and see going on. For folks who weren't paying very close attention, Donald Trump ran on an explicitly anti-trans platform. He said that if appointed or not appointed, if re-elected to office, he would fight for a law that would ban gender affirming care for youth in all 50 states. He wants to sign an executive order preventing the federal government from promoting the concept of like gender transition at any age. You didn't see my air quotes, but there were quotes there. There is talk of a federal trans sports ban, of a federal don't say gay law, and just, all manner of other like terrible policies. They're already trying to like ban trans people from using the bathroom in Congress, right? Like it's wild. And Trump's not even elected. So these families have really no idea what's coming, and everyone's really scared. Like a lot of folks are trying to get out of the country and move somewhere else because it just doesn't seem like America is a safe place for them anymore. Arguably, it was never really a safe place for them, but it just feels like particularly unsafe right now. So you have these families who are giving up everything to start over and do it all over again somewhere else. And this isn't just now, like families have been doing this for years, but it's just like now is the moment, like the shit really hitting the fan. So I think for a lot of these families, they just don't know what the future looks like because they don't know if like they're going to have one or like if they're going to have one here. Like in Texas, Ruby there, she was a trans girl, or she is a trans girl, was 19 at the time I visited, and she really has everything going for her. Like she has this family that loves her, that has affirmed her as trans since even before she came out. They figured out that she was trans at a young age and had sort of like done the work and educated themselves that like when it was time and she was ready to come out, they would be ready. Like she wasn't going to have to educate them. They'd already done everything. And that was like tremendously lucky on her part that, not every kid has that. But she had that in her friends who like loved her, like irregardless of who she is. She had that in her church, which threw her a coming out party after she came out. They had this renaming liturgy, that where you sort of take your old confirmation certificate and you burn it and you get a new one with your name on it. And it's this lovely ceremony. You stand up in front of the church, you give a big speech. It's great. And then her boyfriend, she told him before their first date, and it didn't matter. He said he still liked her anyway. And they got to date and break up for all of the reasons that young people break up. And it was totally mundane and had nothing to do with her being trans. She had all of that like in her corner. But even so, because she lived in Texas at the time that the book was being written, they were trying to move her from to California because she just felt like if she'd stayed in Texas, she couldn't really have a future there. Because it's like the state couldn't really promise her one. They were talking about banning gender affirming care all the way up to 25. And she could then lose her health care if she stays. And it's just like there's always this sort of Damocles hanging over your head. And she would say that it becomes really hard to make plans for like what does 5 years from now look like, 10 years from now, if you just don't know. And what's really sad is that since the election, they've decided that California isn't enough. Now they're moving her to France, right? So she still feels like in this country, she can't really plan for a future if she doesn't know what that future holds. If she doesn't know what the laws are going to look like, if she doesn't know, like, if the president will hate her and how much they'll hate her, right? So she's just got to go somewhere where she can have that. So I really hope that we get to this point where these kids are able to just think about a future in this really like unclouded way, where they don't have these big question marks that they're forced to contend with, that they can just like, I don't know, have a normal, lovely life the way that everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
Just I was going to say they're asked to sort of do this from a really young age, since they come out. They have to fight for so much, they have to fight in their community, sometimes in their families, at the state capitol, and they're like, leading marches and rallies and forming statewide advocacy groups. And they do so much work, and it's just tremendously unfair. Like, I hope that like they just don't have to do this forever. I hope that someday we live in a country where they don't have to do this level of work just to exist.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's so beautifully said, because the thing that really comes across, especially in these chapters, is like the dream big mentality of teenagers, like especially once they feel comfortable, and they feel like themselves. There's so many of these chapters where it's like, I was in this very dark place, but I got to this place, and now they've become like this confident sort of like source of light with these big dreams and these big ideas about what their futures are. And you just really want that for them, you just want them to feel like they have the freedom to go and do whatever it is that they feel called to do in that way that, sort of that big teenager way that like a lot of them have. So, yeah.
I'm at this weird point in my life where I see so many people like my age, like I'm in my like late 30s, where you see everyone's dreams like systematically be like crushed and dismantled, where like people start to realize like life isn't what they thought it would be, and this isn't what they wanted, and how did this become like what their world is, or even what the world is, right? And it's just so sad to see 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds have to contend with that. Like
Mhm.
your dreams shouldn't be crushed this early. It should really be like a lot longer before the world gets to you.
Yeah.
And it's just, even look at Micah in like West Virginia. You have this like 18-year-old kid who has one shot at getting out, and that's NYU. And when that doesn't happen, they have to go, oh, my dreams might not happen.
Yeah.
And that's a tremendously difficult thing to realize at like 36 years old or 26 years old, let alone being 18.
Yeah. Um, Question: do you stay in touch with everybody that you wrote about in the book? And what does that look like? Would you consider possibly doing like a follow up to their stories at some point?
No on the follow up, not like out of like, animosity or something, but I couldn't get all the kids to agree to do it. And I know that I don't even have to ask them. There's no way Clinton Kiley would do this again. Like it just wouldn't happen. And I feel like in 10 years, I might be interested in telling 10 like new stories, not like I almost said 10 stories, but like 7 different stories. Just because there were so many intersections and kinds of like narratives that I really wanted to get at in this book, and I'm sad we didn't get to include. Like, I would love like a native story. I would love like, I would love to go to Alaska because I think Alaska is so beautiful, and it's just like part of the country that most people haven't been to. And I think we also forget that it's America sometimes, right? Oh, right, there's this whole giant glacier up there. And it would just be such a unique setting for a book and for like a queer story that I really wanted that. I wanted a Mormon story for this. I want more like African American stories. Like I want more Black stories. We've got, there's Micah is Black and gender fluid. And I'm really glad that, that was included in the book. But I think that sometimes people get tokenized and you like pretend like one story can possibly stand in for like all of an entire community. And that's just BS. So it's just like the next time around, I want another Black story. I would love multiple Black stories, right? Having 2 Black kids in the book would be awesome. I feel like I want to keep expanding the horizons of this project. But for now, I feel like I got to say everything I wanted to say with this. And I feel like these kids did get to too. We all got out of it what I think we were looking for. And for me, it's like, I feel very settled on the whole thing. I know that I sometimes like get in my feelings a little bit about how much I had to give up for this project because I really gave up like 2 years of my life and 2 years of seeing human beings. It was very not easy. But I got so much out of it. Like these families, it's not just that we keep in touch, but we're like part of each other's family now. I hear from them all the time. Like I heard from 2 of the families yesterday. One of the kids was texting me this morning, right? They're just part of my life now. And I think they're always going to be part of my life for like as long as I exist on this earth. And that just feels like so tremendously lucky to me because I know, I said this before, I know you're not supposed to be friends with the people that you work or that you write about, but for a book like this, it's just kind of inevitable. Like it's just like the way the cookie crumbles. Like I went to a really deep place with these folks. They went to a really deep place with me. You don't really break those kinds of bonds. And yeah, I have to say it also came at I think a really good time or like a nice time for me because my mom died in 2016. I don't love talking about it, but she slipped into a coma and then she died a week later after having a brain aneurysm. Not great. And since then, I don't really have a ton of family, and family itself is kind of a diffuse concept to me. I've got a really cool aunt in Canada who's awesome. I have 2 brothers, one of whom we're praying for, and the other one is like an angel. And I love my little sweet angel baby. I'm so glad to have him. And then I've got my grandparents, my dad's parents, who are really awesome. But other than that, that's kind of it in terms of the people that I like really keep in touch with on a daily basis. They've got a bunch of cousins that are cool, but they're like busy. How often do we really get to see each other? In terms of that, like, needing support or just wanting somebody to talk to, I have like 4 people, right? And that isn't easy. But now, since writing this book, I have family scattered all across the country to where if I end up in South Dakota or Alabama for Christmas, I know I'm going to have a stocking hanging by the fireplace. You know, you have these people who worry about you and check in with you and are always like bugging you to see if you've eaten today. And it's like so annoying in that way that like families like are, you know, but it's wonderful. Like I've always been envious of my friends who have those like lovely, like overbearing families that are always in each other's business all the time and just like gigantic, like those like my big fat Greek wedding families. And I now feel like I've got one of those families, you know, just not in the way I think I would have like foresaw it. So yeah, it's like, it's quite a gift I got from this book.
That's lovely. I love that. Nico, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this book. I've got to tell you, I read it over the course of a week and was really affected by it. It got me thinking about so much, not just in my work with young people, but just observing life around you and just paying attention to what's happening to others. And so I just really commend you for this work and thank you for it. And I hope people go out and buy the book either at their local bookstore or wherever they can find the book.
Wherever is an Amazon, big asterisk there.
Okay.
So no does
Amazon.
Not need your money, girl. Bookshop.org, all store. Those are great resources. If you need a Barnes and Noble, like though they're on dire straits these days, anywhere but Amazon.
Excellent. Okay, I never quite know with authors. Like I always leave it open ended because some of them are like, no, get it on Amazon too.
No. That bald billionaire asshole, don't give him a dime. But anybody else, like absolutely. And I'll say, what you just said, it reminds me of that great quote from Lady Bird that attention and care are the same thing. So I think if there's, one thing that all of us can like take from this, it's like give the world a little bit more of your attention. It matters.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Audiobook is going to be available soon.
Yes. It's a long story that all of you don't need. But we had to re-record it for reasons. And the new version will be out in a couple weeks, I hope. Which that version will be spoken by me with my charming little stutter. So you'll get to hear it for 8 hours at length.
I love it. Nico, thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.